Hello, YouTube. I'm Vince White. I'm an employment attorney, and this video is going to get me canceled. I kid. I've got a bit of a cough today. I apologize. I think I had fever chills last night. It is what it is. We have a question here from YouTube user Thunder Thumbs, who is, I think, trying to get me canceled or at least trip me up. But the show must go on, so we will answer the question. Tough questions require tough answers from tough attorneys. Sorry. What am I doing? All right. Thunder Thumbs asked us, if I self-identify as black, even though I don't appear black, should I be able to claim racial discrimination? Have plaintiff lawyers lost the use of reason? All right. So I think Thunder Thumbs is trying to play with the idea of this like internet meme of I self-identify as a cheeseburger. I'm a cat, so I need a litter box when I go to school. That kind of nonsense, right? Now, I'll say this. That stuff is more the realm of Twitter and message boards and like in a couple of instances, rare instances, some morons in academia, right? It's not really the stuff of like a real life, right? And when I say real life, I mean litigation life. But let's approach this through a couple of stories. Some tied to my own experiences, some tied to current events, and then we'll kind of get down to a more brass tacks kind of response that will have some actual meaning, even though it may not satisfy anyone. Half a decade ago, sitting with a gentleman, he looked an awful lot like me. You know what I mean. So Whitey's pink, right? And he kept talking about racial discrimination. And I was very confused. But this gentleman was facing a lot of racial discrimination in the workplace, he felt. And eventually I had to ask, listen, I need to understand before we move forward, before we can really keep this conversation going, you need to understand how you self-identify vis-a-vis race. Like when you say racial discrimination, what do you mean? And that gentleman was a bit nonplussed by my question. That gentleman felt that I should know his race visually. He felt his race was obvious. And he eventually called me a white devil, which was really thrilling for me because I don't think there's enough good racial slurs for white people. Not that I'm like a fan of racial slurs. I don't think they're not good for anything really. But like when you call a white person a cracker, yes, I do like crackers. They're delicious, right? Like it's, oh, can I have one? There's no sting to it. It doesn't. There's no like, why I oughta. It's nothing, right? So, I give him points for the creativity and the historical acumen to go back to the Boxer Rebellion, the Opium Wars, and hit me with like a kind of a translation of a Chinese slur for the Caucasians, the Europeans who were giving him a hard time during that historical juncture. Like I kind of loved that. That was thrilling for me. But he was very agitated, and I don't like making people angry. That was not my goal in that conversation. My goal was to see if I could help a person. And eventually he did storm out, and kind of like I had to kind of escort him out of the firm because he was extremely agitated, and I never really found out what his race was, like how he self-identified. Right now, would I have brought a case for that gentleman had he reacted to that question differently? The answer is it depends. It depends. If the conversation went one way, I might, and if the conversation went another, maybe not. And I'll give examples of that. If I said, hey, listen, you got to tell me, how do you self-identify in terms of race? And he said, I self-identify, we'll just pick something, every like fanciful like racial name I can think of, like I'm an elf. from the Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure someone's going to say is a racial code of language. So now I've already been canceled. But I'm an elf. I self-identify as elf. I'm elvish, the high elves of Elrond of Rivendell. I'd be like, okay, fair enough. Do you expect people to know that about you visually? Like, how do these people know that you're a high elf from Rivendell? And if the answer is, well, I've got pointy ears, and he shows me the pointy ears, I might say, okay, all right. Let's talk about that. That could be a case, right? There's people will actually know that is your race. And if the answer was, because I told them so, and they got mad when I told them so, that is also potentially a case. Because those people would be on notice that this person self-identifies as a high elf of Rivendell, right? And I've just it's coming back to me that people do, there's like a long academic diatribe about Tolkien being racist. So like now I have regrets about this hypothetical. I don't agree with those academic papers calling Tolkien racist. I mean, listen, everybody was racist in the 40s. So, I mean, probably. But, I mean, everybody's racist today, in my opinion. So, again, probably. But I digress. All right. If his response was instead, we're just going to stick with this hypothetical because we're in too deep. There's no going back now. I was already getting canceled, so might as well just keep plowing ahead. If his answer is, listen, I know I don't have the pointy ears. I know I don't shimmer like a high elf of Rivendell would, but they should effing know that I'm a high elf of Rivendell. It's obvious. To who? To who is it obvious? To whom, I guess I should say. Now, if that's the response, they ought to know. Well, I didn't. I'm not sure they did. And so it's going to be tough for them, potentially, to discriminate against you on the basis of your self-identified heritage as a high elf of Rivendell, right? Because, they didn't know, right? Like, somebody doesn't know your heritage, they can't necessarily discriminate against you on that basis. So that claim, could it be legitimate? It could. Is it a high percentage win rate? For a variety of reasons, it is not. And I would not take that case, right? Now, there's a spectrum there. If his response was, it's the pointy ears. Everybody can see the ears. I just wore my hair down today so you couldn't see the ears. But when I wear it up most of the time, everybody sees the ears and they hate me because I'm a high elf of Rivendell. Probably take that case. Sounds pretty good, right? Coworkers call them pointy ears and stuff. Like, sure. Probably take that case, right? If the case is, well, I told them I'm a high elf and they got agitated with me, that's more in the middle. That's not such an easy calculation, right? And we'll get into why. Brief legal caveat here. In our field, there's something called perceived discrimination. You can perceive someone to be part of a protected class. I'll give you two examples. These are two of the most common. Veterans, when they leave the military, if they've seen combat, and they go to work in private industry, will often face perceived disability discrimination, where their coworkers will say, I know you're a veteran and all veterans have PTSD because our country's been in internal war for 25 years. We've just been losing war after war after war. Horrible, bloody conflicts that have not gone well for us. Now, that person may or may not suffer from PTSD. And if their coworker is saying, I know you have PTSD, I don't want to work with you, and they actually have PTSD, that's very simple. That's just disability discrimination on the basis of PTSD, right? But if that person's not suffering from PTSD, but the coworker says, hey, I don't want to work with you because you have PTSD, I believe you have PTSD, that is perceived disability discrimination. That person doesn't actually have PTSD, but their coworker believes they do, so they perceive them to have the protected class of disability, and they're doing nasty things to them on that basis. That is perceived disability discrimination. Another very common form of discrimination that we see in the perceived class is orientation, right? man or woman goes to works, and a coworker says, hey, for X, Y, and Z reason, I've decided that I think you're homosexual. You're gay. Often, that person's not. And they say, oh, no, I'm not. Coworker says, no, I perceive you to be gay. And I don't like that about you, so I'm going to do bad things to you. Perceived orientation discrimination. Fairly common. Strange, very strange behavior, but common. Common as a claim. We see a lot of those, right? And I bring this up because it's a complicating factor, because you can have this in the realm of race as well, right? Recently had someone throw a slur my way and told me I was showing my gypsy. Well, it's a bit of a perceived, that's a slur, right? But it's not an assumed protected class. Like, this person was like, I assume, I perceive, I just chose to believe that you have Romy heritage. And also, apparently, this person neither likes me nor the Romy people. Okay. That's a complex. Like, people really jump through a lot of hoops for hate, right? A lot of work goes into hating people, right? It's wild. Well, that was perceived racial discrimination, I guess. Can't really say national origin. It's more of a diaspora in a variety of ways. So, perceived racial discrimination. If I came in and I met with a clone of myself and I was like, hey, other Vince, I need you to take my perceived racial discrimination case, I think clone other Vince would say, well, why does this person think you're Romy? And I would say, I don't know. Were you really hurt by that slur that was targeted at Romys? Because you're not Romy. Obviously, both Vinces oppose the use of that word in this hateful context. And I specify in this hateful context because there are Romy people who own and utilize that word and like that word, right? But in this context, it was a slur. It was meant to be hateful. Were you hurt by that? Well, no, because I don't really think I'm Romy. So no, it didn't hurt me. Okay, so we don't know why this person thought that. It didn't really bother you. Other Vince, the clone Vince, probably not going to take that case for me. Right? It's not a very valuable case. It's high risk because you got to convince the jury this person believed that. Right? And it's a lot harder to convince a jury that somebody threw an anti-Romy racial slur at me than it is to have to convince a jury somebody called me a white piece of shit. Right? Like, you look at me as a prospective juror and you're like, yeah, I can see somebody calling that guy a white piece of shit. I can see it. It makes sense. So it's simpler. It's a simpler narrative. It hangs together better. It's a better claim. Potentially, if it happened in the workplace and there's negative workplace consequences, that could be a viable claim. That could actually get taken. But there's a lot of added risk and logical leaps that go into this idea of like, well, that person just decided that I was probably Romy and said mean things to me without any reason to actually believe that I'm aware of. And then the jury's like, that I don't understand why. Why did that happen? Like, it's hard for me to believe you that happened because I don't understand why that would ever happen. It's too weird. It's too out there, right? So it's hard to sell as a case. But it is, in fact, in the realm of perceived racial discrimination, right? So we have this complicating factor. And we'll keep going. Now we're going to get into current events. Let's look at the famous case of Rachel Dolezal. And I want to plead some ignorance on this. I have not studied her situation in depth, but I'll give you a quick rundown of my understanding. She is a white lady, unquestionably. There's nothing about her that is not a white lady, to the best of my knowledge. But she started to say at some point that she was of African American heritage, and possibly at some point began to believe that. She may have sincerely self-identified as African American at some point due to her own beliefs or, whatever was going on in her mind and in her life. So if she walks in for a consultation and says, hey, people are targeting me in the workplace because I'm African American, my question is then, again, okay, how are they reaching the conclusion you're African American? And if she would take the time to answer me, we could have a discourse about why. If the answer is, well, I told everybody I'm African American, and then they got really nasty with me, and I suffered negative workplace consequences, there could be a claim there. There could, because she perceives and other people might perceive her to be African American there. That could be a claim under the law. The problem is, your average juror is going to say, that's a white lady. What are you talking about? Right? And as an employment attorney, my question is, if I have 80 grand to invest in a case, and I can invest in a case for someone who is obviously of a certain race, who's been horribly wronged, and not for nothing, that race has suffered a great deal in our country. Like, right? Listen, people can argue if they want, but at the end of the day, I think it's pretty objectively true. I don't think there's anyone that I know who would disagree. It is harder to be African American in the United States than it is to be white. It's just is what it is. It's, the history, the data, it's pretty settled on this topic, right? So I'm looking at a case, and I've got my 80 grand to invest in a case, right? Let's just assume the case is going to go to Fed lit, trial, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to need a big wad of cash to invest in the case. And I got somebody who's visually a member of a given race who I feel strongly has been targeted on the basis of that race. Like, I feel like the case is very clear cut. The narrative hangs together. It is simple for a jury to understand. Or I could bring the case for the hypothetical Rachel Dolezal, who looks like a white lady and can't really explain to me why she says she self-identifies as African American. And also, I don't personally perceive her to be African American. And I only got the ability to fund one of those cases. Well, one of them sure sounds more likely to recover than the other. And also, for moral reasons, for societal reasons, out of a desire for a better world and more fairness, I'm probably going to be more interested in helping the person who presents as African American with their case for African American, anti-African American discrimination, right? So, Thunder Thumbs, I'm not saying that in that hypothetical, Rachel Dolezal does not have a potential claim. I'm saying that Rachel Dolezal will have a very difficult, and she's hypothetical. She's probably, maybe I shouldn't be using her because I don't know if she's well or what's going on in her life. I mean, she could, listen, there's a spectrum in why people play or believe to be members of other races, and that spectrum can range from perfectly legitimate mental illness to wanting a better chance of getting into university, right? Or a little extra financial aid, right? And that's a big spectrum. And one end of that spectrum, you're probably an asshole. And the other end of that spectrum, you're suffering from a mental disability and you should be helped, right? I don't know where on that spectrum Rachel Dolezal is, and if she's in the spectrum where she's mentally ill, then I'm doing her a disservice here today. And that's entirely possible. I don't know her. I don't know that much about her. It could be the case that she truly, in her heart of hearts, believed herself to be of African American descent, right? In which case, fair enough. In my book, I mean, if you really sincerely believe it, race is a funny thing, and I'm not really in the business of going around telling people what their race is or is not. But I'll tell you, it's awful hard to open a case for her in that hypothetical. You want me to risk 80 grand on a narrative that doesn't hang together, on a far more complex case with far more risk, or I can feel much better about helping this person over here, who's very obviously a member of that protected class, whose narrative and case hangs together, who I don't have to spend days, weeks convincing a jury as to why they should view this person as his or her perceived race. Like, there's just a lot of extra going on there, right? And I don't think those cases get brought very often. It's a little bit difficult to imagine the context that the Rachel Dolezal hypothetical case would be brought. Actually, it's not. I can tell you. The hypothetical is some firm needs money. She has lots of money. She's willing to pay hourly. And she's totally fine with funding her case to the tune of like 300, 400, 500K. Bet you that case gets brought. Not at this firm. Definitely not at this firm. But I bet you that case gets brought somewhere. There's definitely a firm. There's always a firm who will take your money, right? But I just think it's a really high-risk case that doesn't really work in the practicalities of litigation. And I guess, you know, a lot of this stuff that I think you're referencing, Thunder Thumbs, is more the realm of Twitter and like message boards and like weird political discourse in the media that like is meant to get people mad. And it's like not something that happens that often in real life, and probably not something that plaintiff side employment attorneys are like super excited just throw money at, right? But I probably triggered you when I was like, well, if she believes it, I don't really know how that works. Like, I'm not going to run around telling people what the race is. I actually did that when I was a kid. A real piece of shit moment for me. I had a buddy who was a Pacific Islander, good friend. And he was like, yeah, I self-identify as Asian. I was like, oh, you're not Asian. You're Pacific Islander. He was like, hey, appreciate the thought, but Meek, shut the fuck up. And I was a little offended for about 48 hours. And then I was like, hey, I'm a real hassle. I'm sorry. Solid point. You may have more time thinking about your heritage than I do. My bad. Sorry. And I think that was the correct response. Like, I did the bad thing, and I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I did a bad thing. And it's tough to not extrapolate that a little bit to the hypothetical of the person coming in saying, I self-identify as this race. There might be a line in there somewhere. But you know what I don't get paid to do? Find it. So I wish you luck. You can always ask Twitter where the line is. Anyways, this channel's been fun, everybody. And now that I've been canceled, I'll get some time off. Like, subscribe, comment down below. It helps me to help more people just like you. And share the video. I'm sure people will not like this video.